I have been at Women's College Hospital for the last 20 years. 17 of those years were with the sports medicine program, and that's when I started working with the environmental health program at Women's College and started seeing patients with ME, and connected with Stacey Stevens probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, just in terms of helping one of the patients that I was dealing with the environmental health clinic that actually went to see Stacey in California. So in working with her and talking with her, she provided me with a lot of information and sent me to a bunch of resources. And I've continued to work with these patients until the spring. Unfortunately, there were some cutbacks at work, so I unfortunately don't get to work with the patients in the hospital, in the environmental health program anymore directly, except that I'm finishing up with my original patients as needed. So I don't have any formal training in this area, but what I found is based on the discussions I had with Stacey Stevens, with her resources, with my own research, with my experience. I also taught at Sheridan College in Ontario for 10 years and taught in exercise physiology in the athletic therapy program. So that's sort of where the experience from the exercise standpoint comes from. So hopefully this will be of help to you. Certainly I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. That's no problem. We can do questions in the middle as long as you don't mind being recorded as well. And hopefully this will give you some good information. Most of what I'm going to say is written down because when I see patients with CFS-ME, I know it's difficult to remember everything. So most of what I say, I try and put it all on those papers that I've sent you. Those are what I give to my patients when I see them individually at the hospital. So you don't have to remember it all and that kind of thing. What I first like to start with is just encouraging people to think about the activities that they do and how they can perhaps change them. Because in order to start to exercise, which I know is what we want to talk about, we have to have a fairly consistent level of energy. And when you're peaking and then crashing and peaking and crashing, it's hard to introduce exercise into that state. So we want you to try and be as even in your energy levels as possible, which I know may seem ridiculous, but people do find when they take this approach that they have more even days. So I've had patients that tell me this is a bunch of crap. And then they go away and they work with it for a little bit and they come back and they say, well, I don't crash every day now. I don't crash every week now. I'm able to function and do one thing every day, whereas I could do one thing a week before. So it allows people a little bit more control over their level of activity, the things they choose to do or not to do, and perhaps give them better planning ability so that they can enjoy life rather than just manage their illness. Because we all have to expect, weddings come up and parties come up and holidays come up, and we want to be able to enjoy those things. So, being able to spare some energy for those things, save some energy, recover faster, that's sort of the goal. So in looking at the activities that you do on a daily basis, I like to sort of mention pacing approaches that I suggest to people is think about what you do on a day-to-day basis and how you feel after that, both at that day, the next day, days following. Some people crash within, minutes. Some people are hours. Some people not till the next day, and then it can last for days or weeks. So it's trying to track down the things that are costing you a lot. You probably have all heard about the jelly bean analogy, where we have a certain number of jelly beans we can use in a day. And if you use them all, then you're going into the next day's jelly beans. And if you use those, you're going to the day after. So you end up crashing for 1, 2, or 3 days or more. So we want to try and keep our energy expenditure within those jelly beans. So you're not going beyond what you have in your allotment for the day. The challenge is, if you have a good day, you want to do everything and you want to get it all done, or you want to do more because you're having a good day. It's trying to have the restraint and the patience to just do what you can do and not what you shouldn't do. And I know that's difficult and it's easy for me to say, but it's something to keep in mind when you're trying to do this approach, because to do all these exercises on a good day only to crash for a week isn't the goal. We really want to have you in a better state, a sort of more even energy state before you go on to do exercises.
Okay.
All right. So we look at the activities you do on a daily basis. Some people have to, are independently living without any assistance, so they have to do everything. Other people do have assistance, and that's great. But whatever you are doing on a daily basis, trying to break that down into smaller chunks or smaller pieces of activity. So rather than thinking I'm going to clean the whole bathroom, I'll just clean the sink. Rather than thinking I'm going to make dinner, I'll just chop the vegetables, and I'll do that sitting down. So it's trying to make every activity shorter in nature, lighter in nature, easier in whatever way you can. So in terms of the laundry, I suggest people get a sorting basket. One of my patients would spend all of her energy just sorting her laundry and then not have the energy to do it. So if you have 2 baskets or 2 piles or 2 bags, darks and whites, and when the whites are done, then you know you have to do a load of whites. Something as basic as that. If you're folding laundry, sit down to do it. Many patients with CFS-ME have difficulty in standing with orthostatic intolerance, whether it's diagnosed or not. So, and that is a difficulty in managing blood pressure when you go from lying to sitting, from sitting to standing. So standing tends to be the most difficult position to be in. So if we sit to fold laundry, then it's a lot easier than standing to fold laundry. And it's things that we do on a daily basis that we don't necessarily think about because we've always done it that way, trying to find those things to change. If you're getting showered, then having a shower chair rather than standing in a shower, because standing in a warm environment like a shower will make your blood pressure drop. If you then wave your hands over your head to wash your hair, that will also make your blood pressure drop. And that makes most people very fatigued by the end of the shower. So if you have a shower chair to sit in, people tend to feel better at the end of the shower. So you're not exhausting yourself just getting bathed. Having a bath, if having a shower chair isn't enough. And when you're having that shower and sitting down in the shower, make sure you move your soap, like shampoo and conditioner and soap, down to a level that you can reach. So you don't have to keep standing up and sitting down, standing up and sitting down. And people sort of think, well, that's obvious. But many patients have come to me and said it's so hard because I still have to stand up to get the shampoo. So it's those sorts of things that are not always that clear because we've always done things a certain way. But also when you're just struggling to get through it, it's not always that obvious. When you're cooking things, if you can, buy frozen vegetables. They're already cleaned. They're already cut. You don't have to do anything with them. When you're preparing foods like spaghetti or things like that, if you want to chop a bunch of onions up, it takes as much time to chop up and cook one onion as it does to just do a little bit of onion for a smaller meal. So do lots. If you're a meat eater, then frying up a lot of ground beef rather than a little bit, and then freezing it in individual portion sizes so that you're preparing for other meals rather than just the meal that, like today and right now. Sitting down to chop, using something like a slow cooker can also be helpful, but it's just trying to break down every task into smaller pieces. So, doing the laundry doesn't have to be, I'm going to do 2 or 3 loads today. I'm going to do 1 load, and it can sit in the dryer or it can sit in the washer for a little bit. It doesn't have to be dealt with right away. It doesn't have to be put away right away. It doesn't have to be folded right away. It's a frustrating thing to do, but if you can break it up into smaller chunks so that you're building in those rest periods as you go through your day, then the overall rest required tends to be less. So the example I use is one of my patients lives on the 3rd floor of a building and she doesn't have an elevator. And if she goes up all 3 flights of stairs, when she gets to the top of the steps, she has to have a 45-minute to an hour long rest. If she goes up 1 flight of steps and then rests for a minute or 2, and then a second set of steps and rests, by the time she gets to the 3rd set of steps, she doesn't have to rest for the same length of time. So she's gained back 40 to 45 minutes of her day because she hasn't had to lie down at the top of it. She may have spent an extra few minutes getting up there, but she's not spending the same time afterwards recovering from just going up those stairs. One thing that may help with the orthostatic intolerance or that feeling of fatigue or dizziness when sitting and standing is compression stockings, either socks or stockings or thigh-high ones. By having compression on the legs, it seems to help regulate or does help regulate the blood pressure. So some people find that that's very helpful in terms of fatigue they get with going to doctor's appointments or having to be in an upright position for extended periods. Maybe not wearing them all the time, but wearing them when they know they're going to be sitting down with their legs below their heart. And what you may find is that in terms of sitting at home, a lot of patients with CFS-ME tend to sit with their legs up, either tucked underneath them or extended in front of them, but never hanging down. Because when the legs are hanging down, the blood tends to pool in the legs, and then it's harder for that blood to get pumped back up to your heart, which is going to cause more fatigue. So if we can get that blood to stop pooling, either by using compression stockings or not allowing it to happen simply because the legs are more elevated, then you don't tend to have the same level of fatigue or lightheadedness that can happen when your legs are below. If they are below and you're stuck in a doctor's appointment and you don't have stockings on, then try tapping your toes or raising your heels. So that's going to help to pump that circulation or pump that blood back up to your heart using your muscles rather than just letting them pool there again. All right, so hopefully some of that's of use to you in terms of energy management and pacing. It's just a brief snippet, but we do want to get on to the exercise explanations and goals, as well as any questions you might have. It really is important, though, to try and manage all of those energy things, any energy drains that you do on a daily basis. So even things like brushing your teeth or brushing your hair or putting on makeup, any of that sort of stuff, shaving, whatever. Try and sit down to do all of those things, because that energy that's spent doing those things is not really it's not exciting to stand up and brush your teeth. So why use that energy to do that? Why not sit down on the toilet and brush your teeth and then stand up and spit? One of my patients, her heart rate shoots up to 125 beats per minute when she's brushing her teeth, and it's just standing brushing her teeth. So that's costing her a lot to be in that position. So let's sit down and save that energy wherever you can. All right, so in terms of guidelines for exercise, we have a sort of stepwise approach. We like people to work on it, and it depends on their symptoms. And we've got several people here today, so you will all have different symptoms. But we like you to work on, if you are complaining mostly of stiffness and pain, then you would start with range of motion or stretching first of all. And many people who have CFS-ME have fibromyalgia as well, and a lot of pain associated with that. If you don't, that's fine. Then we don't necessarily have to focus so much on that. It is often nice to stretch, but again, it's still going to take energy. So if it's not a big thing for you in terms of stiffness or feeling like you can't move or like things are tight, then I would just go on to doing strengthening. The strengthening that we recommend is very gentle strengthening, usually in a lying position to start out with, because people tolerate it better. It's usually the best position for people to be in, because there's really no pressure on the heart to work in that position. It tends to be most comfortable and less fatiguing. So we start with very few repetitions, 3 to 5 repetitions at a time, one set only of any exercise. And then you would gradually progress, usually by about 1 repetition at a time. And that wouldn't be all of the exercises going up by 1. It would be 1 repetition for the exercise that you feel you can move forward on. When we progress exercises, we only want to go to a maximum of 12 repetitions, 1 set only. We want to try and keep the exercise short in nature. We want to try and keep it in the anaerobic zone, which only lasts up to 2 minutes, but primarily up to 30 seconds. So we want to try and keep any activity as short as we possibly can, particularly when you're working at an intensity that you perceive to be difficult. Once we've done the strengthening, then we can go on to more aerobic type training with breaks involved. But the aerobic activity we tend to leave till the end, unless people are already doing it. I wouldn't take anybody off aerobic exercise or walking type exercise if they're already doing it, but I would suggest not pushing that too hard, because that does tend to make people feel worse. Fibromyalgia patients often do well with aerobic exercise. CFS-ME patients do not usually. As long as you can keep your heart rate low enough and you can go slow enough that you don't have fatigue afterwards, then it's okay, but you do have to watch the limits there. Our goal with exercise is always to take you to the limit, but not push beyond the limit and cause more fatigue, because then we've defeated the purpose of doing the exercise. We want you to be able to continue to do the exercises sort of 3 times a week, not really more than that, without having more fatigue from doing them. That's the other thing. You shouldn't be exhausted after doing the exercises. You should really be able to do them every other day, because they don't cause any more fatigue. And that's why we're looking for a consistent level of energy on a regular basis, so that you're not creating more fatigue from doing these exercises. Okay? I mentioned the anaerobic system. We get our energy source or energy from 2 different sources. We have the aerobic system and the anaerobic system. The aerobic system in patients with CFS-ME tends to, we think, have some difficulty in the way the mitochondria processes the oxygen. So you're breathing in and out, but the body's not using it appropriately, and you're creating fatigue. And that we have mitochondria in all of our cells. So it can be mental fatigue, it can be physical fatigue. It's not just I walked and now I'm tired. It can be I read a book and now I'm tired, or I can't read a book because I'm too tired. I can't go online. I can't watch television. Because these things are all going to cause the same level of fatigue, whether it's physical or mental activity. So it's also something to keep in mind as you go about your day, that when you're resting, Rest shouldn't necessarily be reading or going online and looking at email or watching television. You should be trying to get in some significant rest where it's just you breathing and resting and shutting your mind down, because mental activity really does increase physical fatigue. So we want to try and shut things down on a regular basis throughout the day to try and reduce the level of fatigue you're getting from your daily activities, but also allow yourself to recover. So going back to the anaerobic and the aerobic system, our aerobic system is a system that we use for long-term energy purposes. The anaerobic system is the high energy system that we use for sprinting or weightlifting sort of things. So traditionally, it's a weightlifter or it's a person doing a 100-meter sprint. Unfortunately, in people with CFS-ME, that level, that anaerobic threshold, can get quite low. So we're down to sort of 55%, and that's where our calculation comes in that I had sent you in the paperwork, but also Monica reviewed with you. So 220 minus your age times 55 to 65%. Sort of gives you a range, but limit-wise, we look at 55% as being the maximum we think you should be at. The point of getting that heart rate is that we'd like you to use a heart rate monitor if you can. They range in price. They are getting more difficult to find, particularly the more basic ones that I think are probably the most useful ones. I used to recommend a Polar one that had a chest strap and a wristwatch. If you can still get one of those, that's great. With a timer, or not with the timer, but with a chime or a bell on it when you hit your limit. So you figure out your heart rate, again, 220 minus your age times 55% or 0.55, and that gives you a number. And we try and respect that number in combination with how you feel. So we do use Borg scale of perceived exertion. I like to use the old version. It's similar to the new version. The new version is a different scale, and it doesn't give people with CFS-ME a whole lot of room to work. I like the older scale because sorry, you can't see me, can you? It has more numbers. Simply put, it goes from 6 to 12 is the range we want you working in. So it should always feel like somewhat hard. You're never getting into somewhat hard range. You're staying gentler or easier than that with any activities that you're doing, which is very difficult. But going slowly, doing less, moving in a more careful way or more mindful way is what we're looking for, in combination with that heart rate limit. What the heart rate monitor helps us do is hopefully give you awareness of when you're getting to that limit. We want to get a little bit of a warning. So when you're hitting that limit, you know to stop. So having the chime on the heart rate monitor is very helpful. They do range in price from probably about $70 up to $200. Mio is one version, Polar is another version. And again, they're getting more difficult to find. Online is probably your best bet, but you can probably get them through the Running Room or runners' shops. They used to sell them at Walmart, Canadian Tire, all those sorts of places, but they're getting more and more technical and fancy, and they're a little hard to figure out. So some of my patients are really struggling with the ones that are now available because there's so many bells and whistles on them that it's become too complicated to use. But it is nice to have a very basic one that just chimes when you've hit your limit so that you know you need to back off and slow down and rest. Tying that in with your perceived exertion is the goal. The perceived exertion is sometimes difficult to track. I have some patients who pick it up in a few months. I have other patients who haven't picked it up in a few years because it's really hard for them to know, oh no, I'm hitting that wall. I need to slow down. The heart rate monitor is an external reminder of, hey, I better slow down. I'm getting too high. And if we don't have that, then it's hard to figure out when you're hitting that level. I understand that they're expensive. So if you can look at, even if you have a smartphone and have a heart rate app on your smartphone, the negative to that is you have to hold your phone whenever you're doing anything, because it's not a case of taking your heart rate after you've done an activity, it's while you're doing the activity. So it is not convenient particularly, but if that's all you can do, at least that gives you some options in terms of tracking what your heart is doing. And trying to sort of see what activities cause the most difficulty for you. So keep that in mind and try and modify them as best you can. As we said, sitting down is often much better than standing up. And so one of my patients had a heart rate monitor and she was brushing her teeth and it was 123 and her limit was 105. So going over that limit causes fatigue. So we want to try and bring you back to below that limit. That limit does go down as you get older, so it's not a constant number. It will start to decrease as you get a bit older. But the hope is, as you age, we've also had some improvement in your abilities to do activities, so your heart rate isn't shooting up the same way. The thing is that because of the nature of the illness, you have so much fatigue, it's difficult to keep muscular strength because you're having to sit down or lie down much of the day, and we get deconditioned. So even things like sitting up are difficult. Walking is difficult. Holding your head up is difficult. Moving your arms is difficult. And all of those things are going to cause your heart to work that much harder because you're just struggling to do them. So the goal with the strengthening is to try and make those activities easier over time. And that's why we try and work the strengthening in to build more muscle to enable you to do more over time. It is a slow process, though, so you can't rush it. When we start you with exercise, we try and start you at, as I said, 3 to 5 repetitions, usually starting with one exercise at a time. And each week you add in another exercise if you can. If you feel like you've hit the limit and you think, no, I can only do 3 or 4 and that's it, then you stick with the 3 or 4 that you've got every other day until you feel ready to add in a 5th one. The pictures that I've sent you, there was supine lying only exercises, which means lying on your back. And those ones are gentler because they are range of motion, or they're isometric, meaning the muscle is not lengthening or shortening as you contract. It's really just staying the same. So they're activation of muscles, sorry. There is range of motion in that you're pointing and flexing your feet, bending and straightening your elbow. So it's a beginning point to start to exercise. If you feel that those are not challenging enough, then there is the next set of exercises, which is using TheraBand. And you can do some of them with weights. TheraBand does make it easier. There is latex-free TheraBand. They do have a scent. I know a lot of patients struggle with the smell of them. The silicone-based ones don't tend to smell as much as the latex-based ones, but they follow the same color coding if it's a TheraBand product. Not that you have to use TheraBand, but I may make reference to a color, and yellow is going to be the easiest, and it goes red, green, blue, black, silver, gold. So there's a wide range of TheraBands available that you can use. It could be another company's elastic band or Dynaband or whatever. It doesn't have to be specific to TheraBand. But using those bands provides nice resistance. People often think, well, it's just an elastic band. That's not really doing that much. But the muscle is working against resistance, so that will build strength in that muscle. By building strength, it then becomes easier to fold laundry or brush teeth or prepare food or get dressed, because the muscles are now stronger and more able to do the activities that you want them to do. When you do progress them, as I said earlier, you only want to progress by 1 repetition at a time, because we don't want to have to back up. We don't want to cause fatigue, have you crash, and then have you lose a week or 2 because you just did too much. If you're having a bad day, it's okay to defer it. Do it the next day, or just do the ones that you feel comfortable doing. When you do exercises, and as you add in more, we like you to rest for 3 to 6 times as long as it takes to do the exercise. So if you did 3 repetitions of an exercise, maybe that takes 30 seconds. If you're going to rest for 3 to 6 times as long, we'd want you resting at least 90 seconds before you go on to the next exercise. If you find that you're resting and you really don't feel anything, there's no challenge to that at all, then you may be able to shorten that rest period down. Maybe you don't have to hold it quite as long. If you find that you're requiring a lot more rest than 3 to 6 times, then perhaps the exercise is just a bit too hard and you need to back it up a little. Maybe do fewer repetitions or less resistance so that you're not having to have that much rest afterwards. It's all very trial and error. Unfortunately, we don't have a recipe that's perfect for everybody. So it is you trying it individually to see what you can tolerate and how it feels for you, and then progressing it as you are able. With the exercises that I've given you on the sheets there, I've tried to hit all the major muscle groups in the body, either the supine lying only, which is gentler, or the resistance ones. We've hit all the major muscle groups like biceps, triceps, pecs, rhomboids. It may not be obvious what the exercise is for, but I've tried to hit all those major muscle groups with those exercises. Once you build the program up and you're up to doing 8 exercises, at that point, if you feel that they're not that challenging, you can progress one of them, not necessarily all at the same time, so that the sort of the effects that are going to happen. We all have our favorites, and we all have our weaknesses, and probably know them quite well. So focusing on the weaker areas, if you're short on time or energy or inclination, would be fine. If you felt like, well, my legs really aren't a problem, they feel pretty strong, and I am able to walk fairly well, I can go upstairs, that's okay, then don't worry about doing the legs. Focus on the upper body. We want to focus on the areas that you feel most need the work, and you feel comfortable doing. Once you've done the strengthening, if you did want to add in stretching just because you're feeling like your muscles are getting a bit tighter, we only want to stretch for 15 seconds max, because it still takes energy to do those stretches and to hold those stretches. So you can hold them for less than that. We do like, as long as you can, possibly, because the longer we stretch for, longer we hold the stretch, the better the muscle will stretch. Stretching briefly, like a few seconds, doesn't really do all that much. It's more range of motion, which is still fine to do, but you may not get as much result from that. So if you can hold a stretch for 15 seconds, that's sort of ideal. You can still do them lying. It's nice to do those after a hot shower or after a bath, when you're warm. If you are able to go out for a walk or to do some aerobic exercise, so it's kind of nice to do that stretching after you've done that. You don't have to, though. You can do it just when the need strikes. So if you wake up feeling stiff, then doing some of the range of motion exercises or stretching is fine to do then too. Some people will structure their day so that they do their exercises right before they're planning on having a nap. I caution you on doing that, because if you think about, okay, I'm just going to do all these exercises, then I can go to sleep, we may not be achieving that whole idea of not causing more fatigue with doing the exercise, because we really don't want to have more fatigue, and that's why we start people with so few repetitions. Like 3 to 5 repetitions is the most, and just one exercise. Because the goal is not to make you more tired. The goal is just to start to activate those muscles and get them working again for you, so that you can be stronger and better able to handle the day. Once you've accomplished the strengthening stuff and you want to sort of add in aerobic exercise, I recommend starting with very little. So one of my patients, her goal was to walk around the block. It was to walk to the mailbox and pick up her mail and come back. So we said, okay, well, how about you walk to the end of the driveway and back? And then you walk to the end of the driveway and down to the end of your property, like on the sidewalk, and come back. So she's never getting stuck out somewhere. Or another patient's goal was to walk around the block. I said, well, what if you just walk one way around the block and then come back? So she's never having to go all the way around the block. She knows that she can come back. So, and going in very small, slow, steady steps. Again, the aerobic stuff tends to cause more fatigue and make people feel yucky. So we try and limit the aerobic exercise initially and keep that till later on when you are stronger and better able to do it. The progressions can be whatever you feel comfortable with, but what I'll often say is, set distances, as in I can see how far I'm going, and planning for rests. We generally like people to keep it under 2 minutes at a time, because that's as long as the anaerobic system works for, and then it switches over to the aerobic system. It works primarily in the first 30 seconds, and that's why we say, clean the sink, don't clean the whole bathroom. Clean the toilet, don't clean the whole bathroom. Do one thing and then rest. And then do another thing and then rest. And the same thing applies to exercise. So if you are going outside to walk, do a little bit and then rest. So planning your route where there's park benches or there's a curb to sit on, or you have a rollator and you can sit on the seat, so that you're building in that rest as you go, so you don't end up fatigued or exhausted by the end of the exercise. I just lost my train of thought. There was one thing that I thought of while I was saying that, and I forgot. It'll come back. But regular resting throughout the day really improves things. I had a gentleman who said he would crash at 2:30 every day, regardless of what he did. So he was going to do as much as he possibly could until 2:30, and then he would crash. So, and unfortunately, he was trying to renovate his house to sell it, because he had to sell it. His wife had lost her job and he couldn't work. So under the gun to get this done. And I said, what if you work for an hour and then rest for a half an hour, and then work for an hour, and then rest for half an hour. And he was like, no, I'll never get anything done. And I said, just, he'd been trying it his way for a couple of years, hadn't worked. So I said, why don't we try it this way? By building in the rest throughout the day, he was able to function much better. He wasn't getting the brain fog the same way. So he wasn't making mistakes that he then had to correct. He wasn't getting angry because he wasn't so exhausted. And he would get to 2:30, he would have a rest, and then he'd be able to continue until 4 or 4:30. And granted, he was pushing harder than I would have liked to, but he had to get this done because there was no options. It gave him the ability to manage the tasks that he had to do in a much better way without causing that crashing every single day, the exhaustion, the nausea, the headache, all that sort of stuff from 2:30 for the rest of the day. So it's not that the symptoms are eliminated, but they're managed better. And it's just trying to break these tasks down into small enough chunks of time, whether it's exercise or daily living activities, so that you can manage them more comfortably without the fatigue afterwards. Obviously you're not going to read a book for 30 seconds, but keeping it to limited times, because the mental requirements of reading or watching television is taxing, and that will cause more fatigue. So if you're exercising, then just have it be about exercise. Don't have TV on in the background or something like that. Try and focus on what you're doing, one thing at a time, and then rest, and make sure you're taking that rest as you do your exercises. People tend to get into trouble when they ignore or aren't as focused on what they're doing, because you don't notice the symptoms of the fatigue coming on, perhaps. So we really want to be aware of how you're feeling. All right. Monica, did I forget anything?
I don't think so, Heather. No. Let me know if you want me to share the screen with the exercises and you want to comment anything on specifics. Because I can see them.
Okay. Yeah. So was there any questions about the exercises, I guess? Because I look at them and I think they look very clear, but I've also looked at those exercises a lot over the years. So they make sense to me. They don't always make sense to other people. And I don't want to waste people's time or energy watching something that they totally get, nor do I want to miss out on something that they don't understand.
Right. Perhaps then we can go to questions on those exercises and the handouts.
Sure. I know there was some questions that came in ahead of time. There was 3 questions. I just wanted to make sure I answered those. I think I did as I was going through my talking, but I wanted to just make sure I was very clear about that. So one question was the difference between the stages that Stacy suggests and the readiness to move on to each new stage. So I talked about that. So there was stretching and range of motion as one stage, and we talked about that. So if symptoms are tightness or pain or stiffness, then starting with those ones is a good idea. It's also a gentler way to start your strengthening exercises, because moving the joints through a range of motion still requires strength and muscle activity. So it's a good starting point. If you're feeling your energy is really, really low, then that's a nice place to start. If you have a bit more energy and feel like you're able to work against some resistance, then the strength training that's at low intensity with adequate rest, it would be the next thing, and that's her next stage. And then the short duration interval training would be the doing a little bit of walking and resting, doing a little bit of walking and resting. And then you get to more short duration aerobic interval training. And that's doing longer periods of aerobic exercise. So going beyond the 2-minute mark and into longer periods of aerobic exercise. Fatigue is the guide for how you progress, and also your symptoms is the guide for how you progress. So if it is stiffness, you're working on range of motion or flexibility or stretching. If it's really just trying to get stronger, then you're working on strengthening exercises. And we do tend to recommend keeping the aerobic exercise to the very end, unless you're already doing it. We do want to take you to the limit of what you're able to do, but not go beyond that. And that's a fine line that you have to walk. The second question was, if I'm doing an exercise 3 times and it takes a total of 30 seconds to do it 3 times, and then resting and tolerating well, what's next? So the question was, do I do another set of 3 after resting, or do I try 4 at a time? So I would suggest progressing those exercises by one at a time, not adding another set of 3, because the goal is for any one exercise you do a maximum of 12 repetitions. So you would work them up 4, 5, 6 repetitions of one exercise, and that's all you need to do with that exercise. If you do have a lot of energy and you want to start working on a second set of exercises, that's fine, but we want to try and build up those first set of exercises to a maximum of 12. In anybody that strength trains, we want to try and keep in order to be effective in getting stronger, we look for 12 repetitions as being the max of an exercise, because then we know it's challenging enough that you're going to see change, and you're going to make you stronger. And that's a standard principle of strength training with anybody. If you can do 15 or 20 all at once, then it's probably too easy, in which case we need to make it tougher, either by doing a tougher band or a tougher weight or something like that, or changing to a different position. And then the third question was, if the exercise feels like an 11 or 12 on the Borg scale, but I need more than 3 times the amount of time to recover from after an exercise, am I overdoing it? So I would say yes. We don't want to have to recover for extended periods of time. We want to try and have that recovery be, sort of 3 to 6 times as long for a couple minutes, and then be able to move on to the next exercise. If you're having to recover for that long, you're probably doing a bit much, and we want to bring it back a little bit. You shouldn't have that much fatigue afterwards. We really want to try not to cause more fatigue by doing the exercises. All right. So those are the questions I had ahead of time. So if there's any other questions, or if you want to review the exercises, let me know. So the aerobic system requires oxygen to function, and that's where the mitochondria let us down. In that they're the powerhouses of the cell, and they don't process or use the oxygen properly, which causes more fatigue. The anaerobic system, sorry, I didn't explain that very clearly, I realized. Now, the anaerobic system is the short-term energy system. The energy is stored within the muscles. The creatine phosphate is the energy source for that, and we don't need oxygen for that to function. So that's why we finish off at 2 minutes with the anaerobic system, because it's depleted. We have to rest in order for that to restore itself. So we like people to do the strengthening first, because it tends to make them more functional and make every activity easier. So if you are able to do the exercises and feel like you're ready to start to do some walking, I would start walking in the house. I remembered what I was going to say. The other option that's quite nice for patients that are in their homes to exercise would be an arm bike or a cycle ergometer. It's sort of relatively inexpensive, about $30, $40, and you can buy them from medical supply stores. And it's an arm bike that you could put on a table and use your arms to pedal, or you could sit in a chair and use your legs to pedal. So you'd be sitting semi-reclining in a comfortable chair and pedaling your legs for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, as long as you wish, either with your arms or with your legs. So that would be another option in terms of aerobic exercise if you wanted to start to do that once you felt better. And I know that the 15 seconds and the 30 seconds that I mentioned are anaerobic, but we have to start somewhere in order to start working on the aerobic system.
Right.
Unfortunately, if we don't continue to do it, we start to lose it a little bit. How consistently are we doing laundry every other day? Probably not. Are we doing enough activity on a daily basis to maintain that strength? That's a question mark. If you feel that you are, if you've got a lot of laundry to do and you're doing it every other day and you're doing a lot of lifting or hanging your clothes out to dry, then yeah, you probably skip the ones for your arms. But if you're not doing something consistently, we start to detrain. Once you stop doing something sort of 5 or 6 days in a row, you start to detrain. So it is important to try and maintain strength going forward. And the unfortunate thing is you can't sort of stagnate. You kind of always have to make it a little bit harder, and that's true for everybody. And it's hard to get people to buy into that, because people say, well, when can I stop? Well, it's kind of a lifelong activity to exercise. We like everybody to exercise and get stronger and to keep pushing it a little bit further forward. So people who are perfectly fit, we tell, they got to do the same thing. So we want to try and keep moving forward with your strength, because the stronger you are, the better and easier life is. It's sort of a double-edged sword. If you don't do it, then you might start to get weaker because you're not doing enough to maintain it.
Right.
Because even doing the same level of exercise long term won't maintain strength. You actually start to move backwards. We start to lose if you don't always move forward. So, yeah. Yeah, it becomes more difficult with beta blockers because the heart rate is a lot more regular, but the fatigue still happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have, like, the heart rate monitor becomes a lot less useful. I haven't had a whole lot of patients with beta blockers, to be honest. Like, I maybe 3. So it's not something I've run into a whole lot, but the challenge is, how do you then know that you're pushing too hard? So the hope is, have you been using your heart rate monitor for a long time? Again, it's whether you can recover that quickly. Generally, the rule is 3 to 6 times as long as it takes to do the activity, but some people don't require that much, and I don't have an explanation for why some people do okay with less and some people don't. It's again trial and error. We do usually, I say to people at least 3 times as long, maybe as long as 6 times, and they see, okay, 90 seconds was not enough, but I'm good with 120 seconds. So if you can get by in a pinch with 1-to-1, that's okay. But long term, you probably need more time than that. Like the 3 to 6 times is really more recommended. And so things even like, doing the dishes or whatever, if you're standing for 2 minutes, then I get people to sit for 6 minutes and then go back to doing the dishes again. So it's broken down into very small chunks of time with that big rest afterwards, because it usually lessens the amount of rest that's required at the end. Even though it takes you a lot longer to do stuff, the recovery time is usually less. Yeah, so, I mean, if you're sick or exhausted from crashing from something else, then certainly it's okay to take a pass. I mean, if we think about exercise as being a lifelong pursuit, as we said earlier, that you don't get to stop, unfortunately. Missing a week or 2 or a day or 2 is okay. It's okay to defer to another day when you have more energy. We don't want you feeling sick or crummy and then pushing through and doing more exercise, because then you know that you're going to crash even worse. So really scaling it back, doing the ones that you feel most comfortable with. The ones that I sent you guys, there was a head press and a shoulder press. Those ones are often very well tolerated because they're lying, they're very gentle, they're isometric. So maybe doing 1 or 2 of those exercises if you've built them into your program, and then calling it a day. And then when you go back to the exercises a day or 2 later, do the ones that you can and build it back up again gradually. Sometimes people are away from the exercises for weeks because of illness or whatever, coming back to less repetitions. So starting with back down to 3, starting with just 1 sometimes, if you can only do 1 exercise and building that program back up again. It's very frustrating, but it's a better way to approach it than to try to go back to the same level you were at before you got sick or before you had to take time off. If it is just a mild thing and you can get back to it right away, that's great. But if you do have to take time off, it doesn't mean you've lost everything. It just means that unfortunately you have to back off a little bit and gradually start again. So starting with 1 or 2 exercises and building that program back up again, or starting with fewer repetitions if you haven't been away from it too long. So if you've gotten yourself up to 7 or 8 repetitions, go back down to 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 and building it back up that way so that you're not causing exhaustion from doing the exercise.